My name's Kaylee, and in this video I'm going to tell you all I could find on the fossilized ancient pre-human remains that were launched into space on the third commercial flight by Virgin Galactic on September 8th, 2023. So as you can imagine, launching ancient pre-human remains into space isn't something that scientists and paleontologists around the world perceive as a good idea. But first, let's take a look at the reason as to why these fossils were on board of the commercial flight in space, who chose these fossils, who took them along with them, and why this was done. So according to National Geographic, the two fossils of two different species, one being Australopithecus sediba and the other being Homo naledi, were picked to be on the commercial spaceflight in tribute to humanity's long-standing thirst for exploration. So according to Dr. Lee Berger, who picked out these two fossils and who also filed the application with the South African Heritage Resources Agency to send these remains into space, the mission was symbolic of humankind's appreciation of the contribution of all humanity's ancestors and our ancient relatives. So the stated goal was to promote science and discoveries in South Africa, and this was the basis of the official permission granted by the South African Heritage Resources Agency. What were these two fossils that were taken into space? So the first of the two is a 2-million-year-old collarbone of Australopithecus sediba that was found in what's known as the Cradle of Humankind near Johannesburg in South Africa in 2008 by Matthew Berger, Dr. Lee Berger's son. This particular fossil is a type specimen of Australopithecus sediba. So a type specimen is the specimen that was designated to be the name-bearing representation of a new species, a true example of the species and reference point of identification purposes. Type specimens are catalogued and usually kept in a museum or other collection where scientists are able to access them if needed. There can be more than one type specimen of a species, although there's always one holotype specimen. It's unclear what kind of type specimen this collarbone was, as there are actually several different types of type specimen, but that's unclear. So the other fossil that was launched into space was a 250,000-year-old thumb bone of a Homo naledi individual that was discovered during a large excavation campaign at the Rising Star Cave System in South Africa in 2013 and 2014 by Dr. Lee Berger and his team. So these fossils were carried by astronaut Timothy Nash, a conservationist and entrepreneur born in South Africa with South African and British citizenship, who's closely involved with human origins research in South Africa, according to the Witwatersrand news article about these two fossils going into space. So now that we know the reason behind these fossils being launched into space and all the background information that is needed, it's time to look into how these fossils were being protected on board of the Virgin Galactic flight. As you can imagine, there are some real dangers taking one-of-a-kind fossils into suborbital space with commercial spaceflight still in its infancy, but according to Nash, it's worth the risk. So Timothy Nash said that these two fossils are only a very small part of the fossil record, and they have been very well studied. Exploring involves risks. Human advancements require risks, according to him. So to keep the fossils as protected as possible, the fossils were transported in a carbon fiber tube that Dr. Berger watched over until a ceremony shortly before takeoff. So on screen at the moment you can see the tube and the fossils and how Timothy Nash took the tube with him on the spaceflight. As you can imagine, with something as controversial as taking two fossils of pre-humans into space, many scientists were outraged and appalled. Alessio Veneziano, a biological anthropologist, identified four main issues with the two fossils on the Virgin Galactic spaceflight. Number 1 is the lack of scientific justification for the flight. Number 2 are the ethical issues surrounding respect for human ancestral remains. Number 3, Dr. Berger's access to the fossils, which few other paleontologists share. And number 4 is the misrepresentation of the practice of paleoanthropology. There's also a final major critique, which is the entitlement and privilege revealed by the flight as the fossils were carried aboard the Virgin Galactic spaceflight by Timothy Nash. Nash was among the first 100 investors in the Virgin Galactic company and secured his ticket for a spaceflight this way. He said that the thought of viewing both Earth and the blackness of space has prompted reflections on how far humanity has come. Timothy Nash has been friends with Dr. Berger for over a decade and bought most of the land in the so-called Cradle of Humankind in South Africa to create a private nature preserve for paleotourism. He says that he's committed to protecting the sites where humans' first ancestors lie. He also has a tattoo of Karabo, the Australopithecus sediba boy, whose clavicle he'll carry into space. Most anthropological researchers do not have access to the land and fossils that Dr. Berger has access to through Nash. Therefore, in the eyes of many scientists, Berger misrepresented what anthropologists and paleoanthropologists do. The European Society for the Study of Human Evolution created a post on Twitter, which is now X. I hate the new name. For me, it's Twitter, but that's not the point. So in their post, they described the fossils as unique, rare, and irreplaceable scientific resources. They stated that the launch poses significant risks to their preservation and historical value. They continued by saying, "We do not see the scientific merit of this project and question the ethics of potentially damaging these unique materials. We urge the responsible stewardship and protection of these irreplaceable scientific resources." There were also posts on Twitter, yes, I'm continuing to call it Twitter, of scientists complaining on how these fossils were protected during the spaceflight. In the SAHRA permit under condition number 2, it states very clearly that these fossils must be carefully packed and all packages must be clearly marked with the name of the site, the name and address of the permit holder or the Evolutionary Studies Institute. But the shared pictures of these fossils, their packagings and the container are kept in unmarked bags, no labels, and nothing to identify what they are. The carbon fiber tube, or container if you will, with the fossils inside can be seen to be put into one of Timothy Nash's cargo pants pockets before the flight. During the flight, there's footage of Nash being thrown around in the cabin while having this container in his pocket for at least a short while. Were these fossils placed in the container with anything soft, like cotton or bubble wrap to keep them from being thrown around inside the container? This is unclear. And then there's the issue of National Geographic in their article mentioning that these fossils are of ancient human ancestors, while the official documentation states that the fossils are paleontological and not human for legal reasons. Otherwise, the Human Tissue Act would have made it impossible for these fossils to be able to be sent into space. And it's important to know that the Witwatersrand University Ethics Committee approved the spaceflight of these fossils. There haven't been statements by the Witwatersrand University or Dr. Berger since the spaceflight took place. I actually waited on creating this video in hopes that they would release statements or respond to the complaints made by other members in the scientific community. But unfortunately, this wasn't the case and I went ahead to write this video. I'm not a person who condemns people. I'm someone who always wants to understand their reasoning, their perspective, and how they came to the conclusion in making a decision. So I've tried to create a non-biased video where I give you the facts, the responses from other scientists, and the reasoning for why this happened. My personal opinion on this matter is of no importance in this case, as my opinion is not scientifically based, since I'm simply an amateur with a deep passion for human evolution, prehistory, and history. But I do want to ask you, my viewers, for your opinion on this matter. You can do so by leaving me a comment down below. And with that said, you have reached the end of this video. If you enjoyed watching, then don't forget to give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you'd like to see more of these kind of videos, and click that bell icon if you want to be notified whenever I upload. If you haven't seen my previous videos yet, then click the card in the upper right corner, or click one of the links in the description down below, or click a video in the end card. I would also like to say a massive thank you to my patrons and my channel members. Thank you so much for supporting me. It absolutely means the world to me. I'm eternally grateful. I'm somewhat back-ish, not completely still, but I'll slowly get back to weekly videos and doing all that jazz. And yeah, this was my video on the 2 fossils being sent into suborbital space. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.